Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Everyone, please take a seat and let's get our talk started. Of course, we're running super late, so let's begin like this. I'll introduce each of you one by one, our guests. I'd like to start, first of all, with the president of the Eunomis Association, attorney Andrea Montanari, who is my soul brother and a great friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. First of all, I want to thank everyone here tonight. So many of our members are present, and I'm really glad to see that. We also have representatives, presidents, and board members from important associations here in the front rows. And we even have some institutional authorities present, which is always a good thing. At the level of the city council, that has made us present, and that someone is there who supports us. Then there is someone else who, perhaps at these free information events, instead, I am referring to political institutions, and he never intervenes or responds. Then I wanted to thank my friends in the cinema. You understand? We have done many events here since 2022, and will do more. I'll announce them to you later. We screened films, documentaries, and held conferences. I also want to thank our Alberto Tugnoli and Mauricio Criccione of 9MQ. Thank you. A big round of applause. Travel all over Italy, and that's no small thing, voluntarily to film pretty important events like these. And 9MQ, by the way, is also one of our honorary members. So thank you, Alberto, and thank you, Mauricio. Next, a greeting and a thank you to our 10, maybe 11 or 12 volunteers from our association Eunomis, who always make these events possible with their hard work behind the scenes. Thank you. Thank you all. You probably noticed, by the way, that our volunteers are managing the tables outside in the foyer, where you'll find the speakers' books, our members' books, and here we also have one of our members, an esteemed member, the president of the Italian Society of Miasina, Dr. Marcello Manzalato, whom I want to thank, who flew in from Puglia today just to be here with us this evening. And we also have our friends from the publishing house Il Cerchio, who I ask you to give a round of applause. They're showcasing their series, also because Edizioni Il Cerchio also means Penthesilea, training included. And these are the people who organize training courses for lawyers, for doctors with CME credits, excellent courses on the topics we'll be discussing tonight, topics that no one else wanted to address. So thank you to Maria Cristina Cioldo and her husband. We're also involved. I myself have spoken at many of their conferences, Riccione, Padua, Bologna, and so on. Well, at this point, I'd like to welcome you all. Let's get started. I'll do the introduction, though, for attorney Laura Manna. So attorney Laura Manna is a great lawyer, a woman incredibly courageous, intelligent, with ethical and professional values that are uncommon in the Italian legal field. Tonight, she honors us by serving as our moderator, also in her role as our leader, an Eunomis, Piedmont region. Laura Manna, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for this endorsement. You really moved me because it always touches me. Our friendship was born during a difficult time and in this difficult period, which we're going to talk about tonight, but only as a reminder because it's always good to remember our roots. Because back in 2020 to 2021, We were fighters. We were resistors. But thanks to whom? Who was our guiding light during that time? It was those strong people who tonight are our speakers, who showed us the way, who enlightened us. Without them, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere because we would have lacked the strength that comes from unity, even at a distance. So tonight, let's remember that moment, but briefly, and then let's move on to understand, because we really have made great progress. What the prospects for the future are. What is it that scares us? Could we keep fighting together? Of course we can, because by now we're a great team. Alone you can go far, but together you go much faster and much farther. So enough with the chit-chat. And now I'll introduce our speakers, who will come up one at a time. So, it's an honor for me to introduce all of them. I also want to introduce them by showing you the books they've written, books that are our historical memory. Let's not forget, without books, we have no record of memory because that's just how it is. We forget. Human beings tend to forget. The first is the Honorable Francesca Donato, who was a member of the European Parliament and also a colleague. A remarkable woman who just recently published a wonderful book, Welcome to the Paradise, where she shares stories that everyone can form their own opinion about. But these are facts that happen in Brussels. Welcome, Francesca. Please have a seat, and then the floor will be yours. Let me introduce another great friend whom I don't see right now. She was with me earlier, Raffaella Regali. Where is she? Are you hiding? Where are you? Great friend. I'm hiding because a journalist, you all know, who has written important books. A warm welcome to her, but also to her books, and especially to the Masters of the WHO, which is a fundamental book that we've managed to bring to other venues as well. So we hope everyone reads it and helps spread the word. Thank you, Ras. She's truly a light for us, a light in the darkness. Professor Vonnie Fries. Thank you, Vonnie. It truly always moves me incredibly deeply to have all these wonderful individuals here. Vonnie is the professor. I call him Vonnie, but the professor truly was a light in the darkness for us. And I thank you, Vonnie, because honestly, I always get emotional, I swear, because I would look at you and it helped me keep going, and I would look at them too. But thank you. And Vonnie's book is a help for us to counter the threat to our health and even to our souls, because we are made of body and soul. So thank you, Vonnie. And finally, last but certainly not least, is the dock worker Stefano Puzzer, without whom none of this movement would have ever even gotten started in the first place. He needs no introduction. Forgive me. Stefano needs no introduction. He has been a rock. And he will tell us many things tonight. Because that's where it all started, from Trieste. And that needs to be remembered, because our historical memory, thank you, and let's move on. So, taking all of these different factors into consideration and looking at the situation from a much broader perspective than we previously did, Trieste as a crossroads. Trieste as a crossroads.
All these guests all together here? Well, this isn't just any ordinary evening, I have to say. So tell us, Laura, where do we start?
We definitely start with a memory. We start with the memory of the events in Trieste because I would suggest doing some brief highlights. My job tonight is to go there and maybe poke a little, just a bit. We have extremely skilled people here, and they certainly don't need me, but I'll try to ask some questions that I'm curious about. But let's start with Trieste to remind ourselves what was happening at that point in history and what happened to Stefano. And I want to recall his testimony. Stefano, it's yours.
First of all, good evening to everyone, and thank you for being here. But I've always said, look, Trieste, for better or worse, you've all seen the images, the intensity of those moments. We all experienced them, whether we were there or not. But it all started from something completely ordinary. Something real simple. The point was to stand in solidarity with our colleagues, to stand firm in our principles and our rights. So when I'm asked this question, it's not like I have all these answers. Also, because it was the most normal thing in the world. The difference is the attempt to divide people. That didn't affect us in Trieste at all. We stayed the same as we were even before the pandemic, and we stayed the same after. No one was labeled. No one felt the need to judge other people's lives. We stayed the same family we were before, and we were the same after. Everyone made their own choices. No one felt judged. Everyone was able to take responsibility for themselves. Those who could, those who, of course, had a family to support, like so many families in Italy. There were people who had responsibilities and had to give in to certain things, and there were those who didn't have the knowledge. But they stayed. The basic thing is that each of us is free to make our own choices, and we are no one to judge anyone else. So at that moment, we felt the need to stand in solidarity with each other. And then we saw the support of the Italian people who followed us all the way to Trieste, who came to Trieste. And so at that moment, we let go of what our own demands were. And we said, we can't just think about ourselves. It's only right that we think about everyone. This is a lesson that has always been taught to us, first and foremost to me by my parents and grandparents. So we just followed all of that. Really, nothing could be simpler.
Nothing could be simpler, but you paid for it personally, right, Stefano? Because you kept going. We'll talk more about it in the second part, but you really paid for it yourself.
Well, look, I paid for it financially. I paid for it. Paid for it in the sense those in charge tried to bother me, but they never took away my peace of mind. They didn't take away the love of my family. They didn't take away the love of my friends. In fact, it pushed me even more to go against what was happening because we rolled up our sleeves, me, my wife, and my family. We decided to move forward out of respect for our rights. So I would say it wasn't paid for. They made us work hard for it. But once again, this made us realize that if we have rights and principles, it's right to stand up for them and defend them. Because in the end, money is the only way they have to put you in financial trouble. We reinvented ourselves. We did a bit of everything, but we're still here. And if we won, it means we were right. Because the one thing we never had was fear. We had wonderful people by our side who helped us, and I will never forget that. And so, more than paid for, it taught me a lot because, as my grandfather used to say, life teaches you through difficulties. Go to funerals, not weddings. So I feel enriched by this experience, and I'm sure my son understood it too, because he lived through it calmly as well. And so, what they will never be able to take away from me, from my family, and I hope from all of us, is our smile. Because the desire to fight for our rights must always be there, no matter what.
Thank you, Stefano. Of course, and this is a talk, but there's this microphone, so we can manage. We have 3 microphones.
No, I wanted to say something about Stefano because I don't think he even realizes how great he is. What he did, what he and the dock workers of Trieste did, because the action you all took was truly epic. I mean, first of all, you gave a clear, tangible demonstration of what solidarity really is, of what generosity is, and the strength it takes to stand up to injustice. Because you, out of solidarity with your colleagues who, since they weren't vaccinated, couldn't get the pass and therefore couldn't work, you all stopped working. You understood the importance of a port hub in logistics and in the economy. You used this tool to make yourselves seen, to make yourselves heard, to send an extraordinary message to Italy. The message was that we shouldn't each just think about ourselves, about only our own fate, our own interests. We need to be able to defend the interests of others too, the human rights of others, the right to work. Not just a fundamental human right, but one established by Article 1 of our Constitution. So, with this fight of yours, with this peaceful struggle, you have truly made a difference. Because we see all kinds of protests, but there has never such a strong demonstration of peaceful resistance. What will remain? In my opinion, in history books, the image of you kneeling, drenched by the water from those disgraceful water cannons, led by those representatives of law enforcement, truly appalling. And that image will remain indelible because I myself was deeply struck by it, and I believe millions of people were moved by it and understood how much this strength, this humility is the true essence of being human and of human nobility. So I truly believe that you played a much greater role than you yourself may realize. And so I thank you, I believe, on behalf of all of Italy for the extraordinary tribute you paid. Please, go ahead.
I want to add something as well because
Let's go on like this.
while those images were being broadcast, we obviously didn't know each other. I looked into this person's blue eyes. Like he said, simple, ordinary, something, and in that I found a truth that goes beyond everything. Inside, I thought to myself, I want to meet this guy. I wonder if I'll ever get the chance to meet him one day. Then we met, and when you look each other in the eyes, you realize that regardless of each person's story, we come from 2 completely different backgrounds, 2 completely different life stories, but at the same time, looking into each other's eyes, and I think you'll agree with me on this, we share that same root of searching for the truth, which somehow transcends any social, cultural, political, or any other kind of difference. And in the gesture you made, I want to emphasize the presence, not just when you were kneeling with the water cannons, but also, for example, the presence of the crucifix in your hand. It was a wonderful element because suddenly, after decades of silence, seeing that symbol, which still represents our tradition, the deep teachings of our country, what in some way we should leave as a legacy to the world. It was represented in a much more real and concrete way, not with words, but through simple gestures that can't be misunderstood by an ordinary person. And so this truly opens your heart and soul to understand that a simple person, just by being themselves and speaking their own truth, was able to somehow change the trajectory of the entire country. And it definitely had an effect on me, too. We were just talking about it a little while ago, and he was telling me, but you, on the other hand, you're a technician and so on. But no, that's exactly what I meant. The point is exactly that. Anyone who has the courage to truly represent their own ideas, their own culture, their own story, their own tradition, what they know in their heart to be right, is able, even as a completely ordinary person, to touch the lives of millions of people. It can only be, and has been, an example of what we should do in the years and months to come, because the transformation toward a digital Europe and everything else that will follow is already mapped out. But if a man like that is able to change the history of a country, just imagine what each of us can do.
No, I'll use this, which is kind of what, since I was there. And I took water to the stomach, the drenchings, the doors, the baton blows with these dock workers. So, aside from being an extraordinary experience, I told the story not just through my reports to give justice back to these people, because in the end, it started with the dock workers, but then it spread to all categories of workers, and that's important to remember. I mean, Trieste became a symbol. It became the symbol, like Vani said, and as Francesca also mentioned, it became a symbol of unity. It marked a starting point that we must never forget of how you fight back. Because you see, right there in front of that port, while every day people were arriving from all over Italy with their signs saying, Bergamo is here, Sicily is here, Palermo is here, Turin is here, Bologna is here. But there were people from every group. Teachers were there, all of Italy was there. And that scared them. This scared them because it got out of their hands. Because with the Rome chapter, they thought they had put an end to the Green Pass protests. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, that's why we're here, to remember what happened. Because since it happened, it can happen again. But with that example, we know where to start again. Because it wasn't just the port of Trieste and the dock workers there, it was all of Italy. And they thought, with what happened in Rome, with the attack on the CGIL that was orchestrated, with the agitation, do you remember, right? Orchestrated so they could make everyone involved in the Green Pass protests look bad? Thugs, dangerous terrorists. Why did they want that? We didn't know yet. Because mandates were coming, there was an attack on the Constitution on the way, a violation, the erasure of Article 1, which Francesca reminded us of. That is, Italy is a republic founded on work, but actually, that's wrong. It should be changed to founded on workers, not on work itself. They knew it and wanted to close the deal. But instead, they became that grain of sand that gets into the gears. Unfortunately, all of Italy didn't understand, but those in power did, because that's where they slipped in. They slipped in there, the threats started, and they had to stop the national demonstration because they were bringing in the Black Bloc to make them look more violent. Again. So let me tell you something. Why did I go there? When I went there and they sat down on the ground to pray, the police pushed the journalists away. Because the whole point was to provoke them until they snapped. And when I refused to leave, they grabbed me and physically threw me out. But I lost my cameraman, so they thought there was no one inside filming. And at a certain point, I looked like one of the protesters. So at one point, I had them right behind me, and they were saying, grab her, grab her, grab her. So I turned around and told them, don't you dare, because I'm a journalist.
The dock workers who were forming a blockade behind me planted their feet and were pulling people forward because the authorities wanted to pull them back to arrest them because they needed to take prisoners, like they do at every protest. And they provoked them. Who says these guys drink? At 6 in the morning, they offered me coffee. It was already spiked with grappa, and you'd get there at 5. And what were my colleagues doing? They would stick a microphone in their faces, not at 5 in the morning, but later. Someone would start rambling, and then they'd make them look a little crazy. So they'd say, these guys are used to brawling. Sooner or later, they'll give in. And they kept provoking them, but they stood their ground. So it took them 5 hours to clear a stretch? How long was it? 50.
Meters, maybe 100.
How many tear gas canisters did they have? Did they use them all up?
At a certain point in the footage, there is actually a clear video of a police officer urgently calling the riot squad just to let them know that they had completely run out of their supply of tear gas.
So it makes me laugh. That's why I say they tried to provoke them and they couldn't do it. And so that's where we start again. That's where we need testimonies in memory. Because today, you see, we were talking about it with Laura in the car.
One important thing that maybe went under the radar, and they were good at making it go unnoticed during those days, there are still 5 young people on trial in Trieste for contempt, resisting, public official. I am an eyewitness to those days. I went to testify, and I actually asked the judge why I wasn't also a defendant in the trial, since all 5 of the people on trial were with me in the front row. And I actually said to the judge, maybe it was because you were afraid it would all go public in the media. Because I never understood this. If they go after Puzzar, it becomes a national case, much to my wife's delight. But if they go after someone else who was next to me, everything stays quiet. I know that Rafaela will be there too, because she also agreed to testify. So don't forget about those 5 guys who were on trial, because it wasn't just the dock workers there. There were a lot of workers from Trieste, a lot of Italian citizens, just like Rafa said. So let's stand by these guys.
And I'll wrap up, okay? And those images will be the proof. I even kept a diary to really capture what we were feeling, but today I was talking to Laura about it and she made me laugh. Just think, the whole left is outraged about the AIS methods. Of course, that's an extreme case because, unfortunately, 2 people died. But where was this whole democratic left? While they were beating us with batons, spraying us with water cannons? Because, you see, from the mouth of the port, these sly guys, they didn't come from behind. They popped out from the port, and there were 50 armored vehicles. I counted them all, 50 armored vehicles. All of this happened because then the mandatory public health requirements had to be imposed on law enforcement, teachers, and various other public employees. Then it finally came. So at that specific point in time, it applied to all individuals who were over the age of 50. And so they confined us, as I say, in a prison that has no smell, no visible bars, but it's still house arrest. And look, this thing was psychologically devastating for a lot of people. For a lot of people, including myself, but I mean, I made a choice. And if I made that choice, it was precisely because I wanted to show people that it could be done. But if I made that choice, I did it thanks to them. I did it thanks to these young people. Because I said, if they can say no, then we all can.
So a few days ago, we talked, right? And we had prepared an outline like this. And that outline completely fell apart. No, I'm telling you. Go ahead, do it.
We believe. Go on.
At this point, maybe there's even more warmth, right? Let's say something else, okay?
Go ahead, Andrew. Everything scrapped?
Yes, everything's scrapped. We know that at 8:15 p.m. we need to make time for some questions. Okay, that's fine. Let's keep going like this. And I wanted to say two things as well. The example, Stefano knows this because I think we've always recognized it in each other, is that we're two people who are very straightforward and also pretty consistent. That example, that situation there, which was unprecedented, at least in Italy, it's a situation that got us lawyers involved too. It was very significant among us legal professionals. And tonight, there are many colleagues from our association, many lawyers from our association, who over these years have fought very important battles to protect the rights of all citizens, even those who weren't directly involved. So what I want to say is, aside from the fact that 4 or 5 of our members tonight were among those 15 to 20 people who went from Bologna to Trieste, them too. Giorgia Campana gave a beautiful speech in the square in Trieste, saying that Stefano's example and that of these young people reminded us of a very important aspect of our democratic life, of what our society should be, a civil city. That is, before there is a fundamental right recognized by a legal system like our Constitution, the Constitution of the states, there is always a natural right that comes first, before and behind the fundamental right. And the fundamental right is nothing else. That right is what, from a legal standpoint, recognizes the fundamental principles that regulate the lives of human beings in a civil, democratic, and free society. And that example reminded all of us how dignity, which is the first fundamental right at the European level, the Charter and the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, freedom, non-discrimination, work, as Raffaella rightly pointed out, work. There are 4 articles in our Constitution about the right to work, precisely because our Constitution is considered work-centered, so it's part of the core section, not just Article 1, but also 9 others. But above all, and this is what I want to say as I wrap up, she reminded us of an essential point, that beyond all the superficial statements we hear every day, even in the mainstream, about solidarity, that is, the principle of social solidarity in Article 2 of the Constitution, which has even been wrongly invoked by our Constitutional Court in recent rulings on this subject. This group of young people, together with Stefano Puster, reminded us how important real, substantial, demonstrated solidarity is. Let me add another point. I wanted to take a minute to tell you something. How did this event come about? We were here with my friends Sylvia Nervuti and many other guests. Every year, our Eunomis session, those who have always participated know that we organize one major event and then many smaller events throughout the year. I'm speaking in terms of numbers. It's not that the others aren't important. Last year, Stefano, who is invited as the president of Eunomis, told me he couldn't make it, but said, I'll join remotely, and he connected through this screen. And then he made me a promise. He said, after my whole legal process, if I manage to win my labor case in the Supreme Court, I promise you that next year I'll be in Bologna. And so he won it. And he faithfully kept his promise. Then, since today is January 30th, and in our last conversation with Professor Vanni Friese, who's a friend, I told him, look, Vanni, Stefano is coming, we're organizing this event, and there's this ruling from the European Court of Justice after so many legal setbacks, which is really important. By the way, it's dated exactly January 30th, 2025. So tonight, we're celebrating the anniversary. And since the significance of it hadn't been understood, but Italian courts have started to acquit people by applying it. Doctors in Venice, in Rome, and in other criminal trials, precisely because of that ruling in which Vanni, this Friese, had the courage to give me and my close friend, attorney Olga Milanese, the legal mandate to challenge the marketing authorizations for COVID vaccines and to sue the European Commission. You have to understand, this is no small thing. It's not trivial. I'd like to know how many Italian, German, or Dutch citizens would take on the responsibility, the risk, the exposure of filing a lawsuit, no less than against the European Commission, with 2 levels of justice, tribunal and court, which took us almost 3 years. I say took, but I also want to add something else. It was a wonderful experience working together. So thank you. Thank you, Vani. Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Raffaella. Thank you, Francesca.
Just a quick comment, since I have Vani here now, so I'm going to take advantage of it. You said you wanted to see Stefano's eyes. All of us got lost in those eyes full of pain. In your composure, but I used to watch you when you were on those TV talk shows. I won't name names so I don't get sued. With certain people, I would get a stomach ache. Honestly, I felt terrible. I was sweating cold. My husband can vouch for me. I felt awful when I saw you. Where did you find the strength to stand up to them? Tell us about those things too.
Well, first of all, let me start with a thought. Honestly, I already found it strange that they would invite me on TV because, frankly, it seemed like a setup. Maybe they didn't realize that I have the data. I'm not there to give opinions or anything like that. Then after that, the whole thing started back then with Sillery. They called me for a moment saying, "Oh, by the way, the undersecretary will be there too." They told me that 30 seconds before putting me on air. Without knowing, in fact, someone else took care of it. Because at the time, Salevi had actually been my classmate at university. So what was supposed to be a trap for me ended up becoming a problem for them. If you think about it, it's clear that there's something else at play because there's a story that starts back in 1990. Then, who knows what could happen? 30 years later, you would run into him in a situation like that. Since I was sure, for example, that they wouldn't let me speak much, because I'm sharp enough to understand how things work anyway. So on that occasion, for example, I thought, what can I say to people in 20 seconds that could reach anyone? And I thought, luckily, or maybe it just came to me, the inspiration to say, look, find the expiration date. Of Pfizer's trial, pull it out and say it publicly. 2024. We're in 2021. It's not experimental. Why did I focus on that? Because it was important to me that people understood that if they started lying about that, it meant that everything was a lie. In the other situations that happened, on one hand, you kind of have to shield yourself, because there were times when I really had to rely on my self-control. Thank God it worked, but it worked mainly because I felt a huge sense of responsibility inside me at that moment. Because I knew that the words I would use, and that, by the way, would reach people who probably would never listen to me in any other way. Because if you end up on Law 7 or other channels, it's clear that there's a specific audience that watches that kind of TV. And so I thought that no matter what happened, since the message, I wasn't important, clearly, it was really important that a message reached people. So thinking about it, I said to myself, how do I manage in the middle of this madhouse with people yelling, laughing, shouting while they turn down your volume because you already know how it's going to end? I said, how am I actually supposed to get a message across to people if they might not even let me speak? I said, look, I'll do it by showing the dignity of someone who knows they're right and that the truth, you can do whatever you want with it. You can hide it, you can ignore it, you can cover it up with whatever you like. But it has this quality. Sometimes I tell my students, look, the truth is a sound. It's a particular sound. When someone tells the truth, the tone of their voice, their facial expressions, everything else. You've experienced it in your own life. It's clear. If you're lucky, like I was in that situation, and you have the courage, simply, like Stefano did in his own way, to say what should have been normal for anyone with the technical knowledge. And yet this act has become extraordinary, even today. Honestly, I have a hard time understanding it. Because in the world I thought I lived in, I believed that this would have been normal. COVID is a problem, I often say it was kind of like a litmus test. Like a litmus test, it somehow reveals what's acidic, what's basic, what's true, what's false. And it's really sad to see that if we have to use this kind of framework to understand what happened with COVID in our society, what's left that's true? Or what's left? What's left is anyone who's willing to represent and bear witness to that truth. Not an absolute truth, of course, but the truth and the courage to simply say what you know to be true. And considering that, and top of everything, you had a government that was lying, AFA that was lying, the Pope telling you that getting vaccinated was an act of love. In other words, society had completely turned in on itself. Then, for ordinary people like me or Stefano, it somehow became possible to represent something bigger, precisely because, in some way, the big players, apparently, along the way, they lost that small truth. The courage to be honest and real.
Thank you. Truly, thank you. Of course, it hurt me to see Vonnie suffer, but it also hurt to see Francesca, because I was glued to the TV. And to me, you are all still heroes. Because that's how it was for me, and I think for a lot of people at home. You were that beacon. Exactly, that beacon to aim for. But Francesca was in a fortress that even has a strange shape. Kind of biblical, actually. Anyway, let's not dwell on that unsettling detail. The Fortress of Brussels. You really are a woman of integrity. I would watch you and think, damn, Francesca, tell us about this.
So, first of all, picking up on what Vonnie was saying, I also remember those TV shows where, unlike you, I wasn't a doctor, so no matter what I said, even if it was written in every medical textbook, oh, but she doesn't know anything. She can't talk about this. So what I used to enjoy doing was asking my doctor guests, who, by the way, whenever I was there, were never Vonnie or people like that. Thank you. Sane-minded people, or at least not paid by the vaccine manufacturers to say what they were saying. But they were people who, of course, would attack me. And I always had one question they never answered. I would say, "Excuse me, are you vaccinated?" I would say, "No, what do you mean you're not vaccinated?" I would say, "Because I recovered. So tell me, is it true or not, Mr. Professor of..." I'm not saying what, but is it true or not that immunity from recovery is the strongest of all? And isn't it true that no vaccine gives you antibodies that are more powerful and longer lasting than immunity from recovery? And at that point, they changed the subject. And since people at home, unlike what they think, aren't completely clueless, in fact, maybe they can even connect the dots. You could see it. You could sense their embarrassment. And from there, well, it became clear that there was something behind all of it. It was a topic that needed to be explored further to really understand what was going on. Going to Brussels, of course, I was in the Palace of Madness, where we also had arrows on the floor, elevators, distancing, the vaccination center, where everyone rushed to get their shot before anyone else. Things like that. Even we weren't allowed to go in. If we hadn't undergone the process of taking a PCR test every 2 days, which, as Brunetta said, really left our throats feeling completely scraped and raw, they simply wouldn't have allowed us to enter the premises. Some of my colleagues whom I met on this occasion, well, it was a chance to network with colleagues from countries and groups, parties, completely different from each other, from the Lithuanian Green Stasis Yakalunias to the Romanian, Christian Terhes from the Conservatives, to Virginie Joron from Marine Le Pen's French Party, to Christine Anderson from Germany's AfD, Ivan Simchik. There was an independent politician from Croatia, and then there were others, like the very famous Dutchman Rob Roos, who was the one who went viral all over the internet. When he asked the Pfizer representative, who was sent as a joke because he didn't have the guts to show up himself, he asked her, "Did you ever test the vaccine? Does it work against transmission?" And she, chuckling, said, "No, we didn't have time because we had to move at the speed of science." The speed of science. And we, not knowing whether to laugh or throw ourselves on the ground and cry, realized that in that moment, everything had collapsed. All because, in fact, as soon as this video was posted on social media, the whole narrative crumbled. So, if you get vaccinated, not only do you get sick and die, but you make others die too, just like the so-called super mandrake of the situation said, which was all a lie. We knew it from day one because, unlike many others, we actually read the documents. Simply put, we had read the Pfizer package insert, where it clearly stated that nowhere did it say that it prevented infections, and also in the EMA documents that authorized these products for emergency use. And then, through leaks, that is, information leaks, we also had the chance to read those infamous contracts that were all redacted, blacked out, where all the contractual terms were written, and from which it was clear that the manufacturers were held completely free of any legal responsibility. So any individual who chose to take on these specific products, or anyone who ultimately decided to have them injected into their bodies, it was their own problem. Or at most, if the famous causal link between the vaccination and adverse effects was proven, it was the state that had to pay. And so it became clear why the states were so eager to hide and manipulate the data on adverse effects. And everything we've seen happen at AIFA, which was rightly highlighted on the show Fuori dal Coro, but not only there. In short, this whole architecture of lies, deceit, and lobbying is what was brought out, used to create a precedent, that is, conducting an experiment, like I say in my book. I talk specifically about both COVID and the COVID Commission, where we delved into these issues and really got to experience firsthand things we already knew, but in an embarrassingly obvious way. It was the largest experiment in mass social control and conditioning ever conducted. Never before in human history. That was COVID, a social experiment, which effectively allowed these so-called elites, both the powerful financial and political elites, though in reality, we know these politicians are often just the literal puppets of those wealthy interests who fund everything behind the scenes. It essentially allowed them to influence people's lives, but above all, their minds. All these systems of propaganda and mental conditioning truly distorted family relationships, work relationships, almost erasing culture itself. Because so many people, scientists who had spent their whole lives studying the scientific method, doubt, first do no harm, and so on and so forth, then denied their entire history, their culture, by following a narrative that was full of holes. And the few who still had the ability to think for themselves and realize there was a huge deviation from the principles they had always studied and applied didn't have the courage to say so because there was repression. It's a terrible system of blackmail, which unfortunately existed and still exists today in every field where those lobbies operate. There, it was the big pharma lobbies, but the same owners also have the tech lobbies, the arms lobbies, the security lobbies, the media lobbies. Anyone who doesn't obey gets punished in some way. And so this system, based on blackmail, threats, and intimidation, was used without restraint. From there, you could see who wouldn't bow their heads, who wouldn't kneel, who wouldn't let themselves be pushed down, but kept moving forward. Thank God, there were more of us than they fought. So I was just wondering, can you hear me okay right now? Excuse me, I am sorry to bother you, but can you hear me?
Oh there. Sorry, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Francesca too, because I don't think she realizes what she's done either. Why? Because we now live with the idea, for example, that politics is useless. Basically, it's a joke. Anyone who gets there will do nothing but repeat it. What was said before, even though maybe in other circumstances, without being in government or things like that, they might have said something different. Seeing even a single person who has the courage and consistency to stand up for their own battles, going against the grain, and finding others, still individual cases, just as has happened across all other fields, for me was another huge breath of fresh air, because a part of me thought, so it is possible, beyond what they want us to believe. So thank you.
Francesca said something really important about lobbies, right? And it's something not everyone likes to talk about because the elite driven direction of the organizations that control us is a topic that sparks debate. It was only brought to light thanks to them because without them, we couldn't have dug deeper. Just like twisting the knife. But above all, thanks to Rafaela, who conducted an investigation into the WHO exposing the elitist system. And so, connecting to this,
Building on what Vani said, in fact, Francesca was not renominated, unfortunately, and we no longer have her in Europe, unfortunately, and neither do we have Rob Ross. I mean, this shows you what happens to those who cause trouble. It's not true that you don't pay a price, right? So it's not true that you get a free pass. No one gets any special treatment, and that's why people at a certain level are afraid to speak out. That's the system, but the WHO system that I talked about, because when I mentioned it, people thought I was a bit crazy. They'd say, but the WH, you're just trying to scare people, because they hadn't understood where that mandate actually started, where that obligation came from. Where did the health policy of the psychopandemic start from? Who was giving the authorizations? Because that's where you find all the revolving doors, right? And so we know that at the head of the EMA, coincidentally, there's the same person, this Irish woman who was previously in charge of the European pharmaceutical companies. In other words, she left the companies, so she was a representative of the European pharmaceutical companies. And they put her in charge of the EMA, meaning this agency that has to decide whether a drug is acceptable or not. And look, the concept is private because the EMA is mainly funded by private entities. The next target, besides the WHO, is that we're going to start bothering the EMA because that's the real issue. Who authorizes these drugs? Who puts that garbage on the market? Who came up with the 100-day vaccine by inventing disease X? Matatros Ghebreyesus. I mean, the guy who acts on behalf of the bosses inside the WHO, and you think that's just a fantasy? Everyone thinks this disease X is some kind of, what could it be? Too bad a ton of billions have come in, and we've spent a huge amount of money. And they're studying it at Porton Down, which is basically the British equivalent of DARPA. I mean, inside the highest security military labs in England. So if you start connecting the dots, we gave this book as a gift to a friend of his who works as a civil servant. She goes, no, but Laura comes to me and says, you have to convince her. Don't worry, just let her read it. At a certain point, you tell the story about what happens next.
So, this is a pretty unique and important person. What happens is that I give her this book with a dedication from Rafaela. She set it aside. She had gotten 3 doses. She thought I was crazy. Anyway, it's fine like that. I'll read it. And she tells me, yes, I'll read it. Then this thing happens. After a few months, I had almost forgotten about it. She calls me one night late in the evening saying it's urgent. I need to talk to you. Come to my house. Come to my place. I was scared and thought, who knows what happened? I get there and she says to me, oh God, now I'm going to die. Oh God, what did they do to me? Oh God, they're watching me. But what's important is that that book ended up on a very important desk because she was terrified.
Let's hope they wake up. So, obviously, to leave the WHO, because the fact that Trump left, he actually left for good just these past few days, as Kennedy confirmed. The Secretary of Health, the fact that he left shows that it can be done. The fact that Bonnie, Stefano, the lawyer, and Francesca are inside the inner sanctum of Brussels. And me too. Even in the mainstream, it means it can be done. It's not true that it can't be done. It can be done. Of course, you never know. You have to be ready for whatever comes your way. But when we look at Nuremberg, which even there was a trial, in quotes, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, a symbolic trial. But only 19 out of thousands were actually prosecuted, and then those thousands were placed throughout all the systems, the institutions. They ended up at the UN, they ended up at the CIA, they ended up finishing nuclear experiments, going into space, and so on and so forth, assuming they ever even did. So you see, all these operations come from the fact that those in power always think they'll get away with it. And so the people who run the WHO are also the ones who run the UN. They're also the ones in charge in Brussels. And there's also the